Hey everybody, welcome back. All right, we are continuing the work on Project Blue Balls, which is a 1991 Polaris Indy 500. So go ahead and check out the playlist. It'll get you up to speed as far as everything that's transpired up at this point. So at this point, we are ready to reassemble the engine. I'm gonna set you up in the tripod and walk you through the process and show you what you need to do. So let's get to work. All right, so first and foremost, if you're getting into something like this, the biggest thing you wanna do is prep, clean, and make sure everything is good to go before you're at the point of reassembly, because the last thing you want to do is you're going through the process and you realize you didn't scrape something, or there's a piece of gasket left over, or you have rusty hardware or whatever it is, and basically you have to stop and whatever. So as you go through this process, you should be able to do this thing with no gloves, because everything should be clean. So if you're going through the process of assembly and your hands are getting dirty, you need to stop and recheck your work and make sure you're going at it the right way. First thing I normally do is, as far as all the case halves, I degrease them, I pressure wash them, and then I'll hit them with acetone and brake cleaner, and then I'll go over everything, clean everything up with Scotch-Brite, and then what I'll typically do is I'll look at all the surfaces and make sure that there's no dings or anything like that on both sides. And then, because if you don't, when you go to seal the case halves, if you have any proud surfaces when you go to seal it, it's gonna prevent the case from sealing, and then you're gonna have a air leak. So take your time, make sure that you have no case sealant left over. Take a straight razor blade and just scrape it across the top. And then the reason for that is if there is a nick or a ding on the case surface, when you're dragging the razor blade across, it's going to hit it. You'll see a shiny spot, and then you can address it at that point. So I've already done all that. I've cleaned these things probably about 2 or 3 times at this point. Don't pay any attention to the dark spots, because that is actually just staining on the cases. It's not a indication of dirt or anything like that. It's just stains. So at this point, what I usually do is I'll take a couple blocks and I'll elevate the top half of the case and I'll get it up in the air. And the reason why is when I drop the connecting rods down, I don't want them hitting the work surface. So at this point, what you want to do is just take some oil and then just put some oil where the bearings are going to ride, and basically you're kind of just going to like pre-lube them and go from there, right? So this is probably the messiest part of the job, right? Just take some oil, put it in there, get it nice and lubed up. So I'm not gonna worry about the other side for now. I'll come back to that later, right? So now that we have this oiled up, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna put the crank seals on the crank, right? So before you do that, what you want to do is take some oil, or actually take some grease. Doesn't matter really what it is, because all you want to do is put some grease on the crankshaft. And what this is going to do, this is going to protect the seal during the first couple minutes of startup until it starts getting oil from the oil pump and everything else. So you can be as liberal as you want, because again, all the stuff for the most part is gonna burn away. So don't worry too much about putting too much on. Put some on the seal as well. Okay, do it on both of them. All right. So the way to put the seal on, and for the most part, these things are symmetrical, but if you look, maybe hard to see in the camera, there is a little spring on the going around the seal. I always put the seal on the outside of the engine, and the reason why is, in the event that you do have a catastrophic failure and that seal breaks or that spring breaks, you want it to be on the outside of the engine. You don't want it to be on the inside. So all you can do is you're just going to take your seal, slide it on the crank, put it right there. Same thing, make sure it's going the right way, and put it on the other side, right? That's good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pick up the crank and then we're going to drop it into the case shaft. But before we do that, if you look on the bearings, there's a anti-rotation pin. Each bearing has one. So what I'll typically do is I'll put them all in the 12 o'clock position, right? So I know that they're not in the way when I go to set the crank down, right? So let's go ahead and grab the crank, and all we're gonna do is we're just gonna slowly drop it down. And if you look, there's a locating ring on this bearing. What you can do is you're gonna drop it down, and at the same time I'm lining the crank seals so they fall into the groove, and we're good, right? So at this point on the bearings for the anti-rotation pin, there's a milled pocket in each of the cases. So what you want to do is, you're gonna slightly lift up on the crank on one side, and all you're gonna do is you're gonna rotate the bearing and slide the anti-rotation pin into that pocket, right? And we're gonna do that for all of them. So that's in there, that's in there, that's in there, there. So now all the bearings are seated. All right, so we're pressed down on it. We're looking pretty good. So I'm just gonna realign my block. All right, so at this point, I can check my crank seal, make sure it's still in place. Looks good. Yep, it's straight. And all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just slowly rotate the crank. See how it spins? It feels pretty good. All right, so at this point, what I'm gonna do is, even though I cleaned the case surfaces before I started this, again, I've been touching it and everything else, I'm gonna take some brake clean and I'm just gonna put it on a rag, and I'm gonna clean the mating surface all the way around, and then we'll come back and then we'll start applying the silicone. So like I said, just take some brake clean on a microfiber and just go across your surface and clean it up. Make sure you don't have any residual oils or anything like that on the surface, because if you do, it will interact with the silicone and it will either thin it out or it may prevent it from curing, right? So then I'm just gonna go back with the dry portion of it, cleaning the excess off from the surface. Go from there. All right, so as far as silicone, this is what I'm using. I'm using Motor Seal gasket maker. It's actually designed for sealing case halves. And when you do this, you go very sparingly. All you need is a thin coat of it on one side. And then, so all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna spread it. I'm gonna apply it, right? Because this stuff is pretty thin. I'm just gonna take a little acid brush and I'm just gonna lightly coat the surface. So almost like you're painting it on. So, and these surfaces are pretty smooth, so it doesn't take a ton of the stuff to get the result that you want. So just gonna take it. We have the sealant applied to both cases. I've let it tack up for about 2 or 3 minutes. So all right, on the case half, there's a couple dowel pins that helps you with the alignment. Pretty foolproof. So my dowel pins are over here. So I'm gonna just line it up real quick. Before I sit it down, I'm gonna make sure I'm aligned with my case seals and everything looks good. All right, so now we're gonna install all the hardware, right? So there's a couple big bolts, goes on the end. Then there's a bunch of short ones that go on the outside. And right now I'm just finger tightening these. I'm just getting them started. So then we're just going to continue starting the hardware. All right, so at this point, we're just gonna run down the bolts. I'm just gonna finger tight them. All right, so at this point, I'm looking at the squeeze out from all the silicone, and it looks pretty good. I don't see any real big issues, so I am gonna kind of clean it up. All right, so now we're gonna start the torquing of the case bolts. The smaller ones are 18 foot-pounds. The two bigger ones on the end, those are 26 foot-pounds. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna creep up to it, and so I'm gonna start at 15. And basically, you know, like any typical torque pattern, you kind of start somewhere, pick a point, and then you work your way out. So I'm just gonna start here, right? You're gonna do this one. Okay, so now I'm gonna go to my final torque on 18. Now I'm upping these to 26. All right, so the case is torqued, so I'm just gonna check it again. I'm just gonna spin it over slowly, see how it feels. Feels pretty good. All right, so at this point, we are gonna start oiling the crank, right? So on the case, there are 4 holes. There's one there, there's one there, one there, one there, right? And basically those holes are oil delivery holes. And what they're there for is As the engine is running, oil and gas is being injected into the engine, and these will transport oil down into the bearings of the crankshaft. Right, so again, we don't want to start up dry. So all we're going to do is we're just going to take some oil and we're just going to kind of force feed it, right? Don't worry about using too much because a lot of the stuff is going to burn off. So go ahead, use as much or as little as you want. I always use a little bit more than I need to because I'd rather have it be filled with oil and not having any issues with for startup. So again, I am going to put oil everywhere. And also don't forget to put oil on your connecting rods as well because there are needle bearings in there. So all we're going to do is just going to rotate it up. And same thing, we're just going to put some oil, right? So then we're just going to rotate it, right? Right? So I'm being careful, and the reason why is because I don't want these connecting rods to hit the side of the case. Again, this is another thing you have to worry about when you're doing your case prep, is if you spin the engine oil and these things are dancing left and right and everything else, what's going to happen is they're going to make contact with the case. And what will happen is they'll actually push aluminum into the proud of the surface and like that. So if, part of your case prep is making sure that you don't have any proud areas over there. So just make sure when you're doing that, make sure your case is nice and flat. So at this point, the crankshaft is all oiled up. And what we're gonna do next is we're gonna attach the pistons to the connecting rods. And then once we'll do that, we'll clean up our surface. Then we'll put our base gasket on, and then we'll attach the cylinder and drop that down. All right, so at this point, we're ready to put the pistons on the connecting rods. So on the Indy 500s, and yes, I am reusing these pistons because when I did the check on this engine before I pulled it apart, I had 135 pounds in both cylinders. So the cylinders look fine, the pistons look fine. So again, my choice. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the pistons that came out of it. But if you look, there's two ring lands, right, or locating pins on the pistons. Those go towards the back of the engine, right? Because if you don't, if you turn around, it'll actually catch on the exhaust port. So all we're gonna do is I'm taking the needle bearing and I'm going to kind of line everything up. And so I'm gonna rotate it forward. So I'm gonna put the needle bearing into the connecting rod, and then I'm going to take the wrist pin, slide it into place, and all right, so that feels good. All right, so at this point, I'm ready to install the circlip into the piston to lock in the wrist pin. So when you do this, right, there is a notch in the piston, right? And you would think, so I'll just use that notch and I'll put the gap of the circlip right there. You don't want to do that because then it will have a chance to work itself out. Realistically, you want to put the gap on the circlip on the opposite side of the notch. All right, so what we're gonna do is, and this is kind of tricky, so I'm gonna try to do it and talk at the same time. So I know you probably can't see what I'm doing, but I apologize. So I got the circlip in one side, and I'm just going to take So we got the circlip in. I'm just checking, make sure it's in the groove, and it is. Looks pretty good. So now we're gonna do the same thing for the other side. I'm just gonna take needle bearing, roll that in some oil, along with the wrist pin. We're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna rotate the other connecting rod up while we move the other one down. Make sure we don't hit the skirt, right? Kind of lock that in place. So again, we know our needle bearing is pre-lubed. And looking at the ring lands, where are we? There's one, there's two. All right, so we're gonna do that, same thing. Drop that in. Okay. That's in there. Circlips are in. And they didn't go flying across the room, so that's good. All right, so at this point, I'm gonna, again, take some brake clean. I'm gonna clean up all the oil from the case and get ready to install the cylinder onto the case. All right, so now we're ready to put the basics gasket on. They only go on one way. On the Indy 500, it's pretty foolproof to put it on there because if you look, there's two studs on this side and there's one on this side, corresponds with the case. It's pretty much idiot proof. So the only thing you have to worry about is when you put it on, making sure you put it on with the riding side up. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna slip that over the pistons and then, without ripping it, okay. And this is probably the trickiest part of it. It's getting orientated, right? All right, now comes the fun part, installing the cylinder onto the pistons. And this can be a little bit of a challenge because you gotta do them all at the same time. So what you wanna do is, I'm looking at the locating pin on the back of the piston. Make sure we're in line on both sides, because you wanna do that before you start this journey, because you only get really one shot on it. All right, so we're good. So, what you want to do is take some oil, lube up the cylinder, right? Do it on both sides. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing for around the rings. Right, so now we're going to take the cylinder and we're going to take it and then we're going to compress the rings, make sure we're still lined up with our ring lands or we're not, because they moved a little bit. So we're going to do that and we're going to take it so we got that one. So now, we do the same thing on this side. There you go. Hopefully you saw that. I got both pistons into the cylinders, and then I had to get it down there while getting it over the base studs as well at the same time. So we're just gonna rotate this. All right, so we're good. All right, so now we are just installing the nuts for the on the studs for the cylinder. All right, so I apologize. I thought I hit record when I started torquing down the cylinder nuts. I didn't, but you torque them down to 26 foot-pounds, and you want to use something like this. This is an attachment you can stick onto your torque wrench, 14 millimeters. It's made by Motion Pro, and then you just go around and like you normally do, and you torque it down, and you're good to go. All right. So at this point, we are ready to put on the head. All right. So this is the head gasket, right? So it can actually go on 4 different ways, and 3 of them are wrong, right? So one would think the writing goes up. It does not. So the writing actually goes down on this particular one. And if we put it down, right, what we're going to do is, first thing we're going to see is this hole is not correct. Basically, it's the alignment on it is wrong. So what you want to do is, you want to spin it around, put it on there, take a look at all the holes, right? That one's good, 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 good. Yep, 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 yep. Yes, 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 and yes. All right? So what you want to do is, the reason I said that is because you want to check all the passages before you put this on, because it is very easy to put on this head gasket on the wrong way, and it turns out that you're going to block it, right? So if we look at this, right? Nope, nope, nope. Nope. Yes, yes, whatever, right? So you get the point. So then when we say, oh, I'll just spin it around, drop it on there, say, oh, nope, yes, kinda, maybe, nope, right? So again, when you buy this, pay attention. There's 4 ways to put it on, 3 are the wrong way. So what we're gonna do is, I already know that's the wrong way, so put on there 1 more time. Yes, 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 yup, yup, good, good, yup, 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 and yes. All right, so we know it's on the right way. So at that point, what you want to do is, you want to drop on the head, right? So we know we're in the right orientation. We know we are clean because I have already cleaned it off, right? So there we're good. All right, so we're on. All right, so now we're just going to go ahead and put on the nuts for the head. Now I'm just going to go around and just lightly seat them. Now we're going to torque the head bolts to 25 foot-pounds. We're going to do it in 2 increments. We're going to start at 20. All right, first torque at 20 is done, going to 25. All right, so now we're getting ready to put the oil pump drive in there. So in case you didn't realize it, there's actually 3 components to the oil drive. You have this bushing, you have the drive itself, then you have the washer. Make sure you don't forget that washer because you absolutely need that between the bushing and the drive. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna drop this in here. Attempt to drop it in there. There it goes. Okay, and the next thing you want to do is you want to turn the crank and make sure that the drive is actually spinning. And we're good on that. Okay, that's in there seated pretty well. So then the next thing you want to do is we want to replace the O-ring on the drive. And the next thing you have to do is when you took it apart, there should have been a couple shims, right? So I talked about this in the disassembly video. These shims will actually set the pinion angle or the pinion depth on the drive onto the crankshaft. So it's very easy to lose these, but you actually need them, so don't lose them. So we're just gonna put those right there. Feels like it's just riding up on that O-ring. All right, so we got the stator in. So again, it's pretty simple. You just pass the wires through and then you install the grommet. I still got to tuck that in a little bit, still poking through a little bit. And then on most stators, there is an alignment mark on the stator plate that corresponds with an alignment mark on the case. On this particular motor, there isn't one. So I actually went through and I took a look at the disassembly video, and I looked at where the screw was in correlation or relationship to the plate, and basically that's where we're at. So I then went and looked at all the documentation that I have as far as all the service manuals, and from what I can see, what the Polaris wanted you to do, or what Fuji wanted you to do, is basically you take that alignment mark and then you're gonna align it with the center of the screw on this side, and then there's 3 notches down there, and basically you align it with that screw at the same time. You do that, sets the orientation, and then you're pretty damn close. So at this point, we just have to reinstall the flywheel and go to the next step. All right, so now we're at the point where we want to reinstall the water pump. So in the gasket kit, they give you a new O-ring, and in comparison to the old one, new one's a little bit skinnier. We'll see how it fits. So what we'll do is we're just gonna put a little WD-40 in here and just lubricate that surface, and then we'll put the new O-ring on the pump, right? So then what we'll do is we'll put a little WD on it, so when we go to put the pump in there, we don't risk tearing it. Right, so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna slide it home. There it goes. So now we're gonna put the belt on there, and then we're gonna put the drive for the belt on. All right, so one of the last things we have to do is we have to install the gasket on the thermostat neck. If you remember when we took it apart, there was no gasket. There was just a bunch of blue goo. And so what we do, we're just gonna take our hardware. Let's start all our screws. And these are just 10 millimeters. Go ahead and tighten those down. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up. So went ahead and threw the Y pipe on there. And the only thing that's really left that needs to be done is I gotta put the recoil back on it. And went to go do that, and I noticed that the spring was not catching. So I took the cover off, and then this fucking happened. So so I'm going to deal with this on another day, because like most people, I have zero patience when dealing with one of these springs. I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm fucking exhausted, so I'm not dealing with that thing right now. So at this point, we just have to do a couple things on the sled. There's a couple wiring issues we need to fix. Gotta clean the carbs, fuel lines, stuff like that. And then we'll get this thing back in the sled and get it running, hopefully on Labor Day weekend. So, all right, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching. I know it was a long video, but hopefully this helps out anybody that's going down the road of doing a reseal or a rebuild. I really wouldn't call this a full rebuild, because the only thing we really did was replace a crank bearing. We used the existing cylinders, pistons and rings and everything else, and so trying to save some money on this. So but again, there's no harm in doing that as long as you know your parts are in good shape. There's nothing wrong with using existing parts. So all right, if there's any thoughts, questions, concerns, go leave them in the comments box. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And as always, thanks for watching and have a great day. See ya.